In the early 16th century, Europe was deeply entrenched in the power and influence of the Catholic Church. But beneath the surface of piety and tradition, cracks were forming. Cracks that would soon fracture the very foundation of Christian Europe. In 1517, a German monk named Martin Luther would ignite a religious revolution that would reshape Christianity forever. This is the story of the Protestant Reformation, a movement that challenged the authority of the Catholic Church, reshaped Christian theology, and led to the birth of Protestantism. The 16th century was a time of immense religious devotion in Europe. The Catholic Church wielded incredible power, both spiritual and political. It held the keys to salvation, and its clergy were seen as the only intermediaries between God and man. The Pope in Rome was the spiritual leader of all Christians. But by this time, the Church had grown wealthy and corrupt. The sale of indulgences, payments made to the Church to reduce punishment for sins, was rampant. It was a practice that angered many, but most people accepted it as a way to ensure their salvation or that of their loved ones. Many of the faithful, particularly the poor, saw this as an unjust practice, one that placed a heavy financial burden on them, while the wealthy could easily buy their way into heaven. But not everyone accepted this state of affairs. Martin Luther, a monk and theology professor, had studied the Bible extensively. As he delved into the scriptures, he began to question the teachings and practices of the Catholic Church. He saw a stark contrast between what the Bible said and what the Church was doing. Luther's studies led him to the conclusion that salvation came not through indulgences, but through faith alone. It was a radical idea that contradicted the Church's teachings. And so, on October 31st, 1517, Luther took a stand against the Church in a dramatic and symbolic way. On that fateful day, Luther nailed his famous 95 Theses, a list of criticisms aimed at the Church, on the door of the Castle Church in Wittenberg. The document highlighted his objections to the sale of indulgences and questioned the authority of the Pope. It was a call for reform, not a full-on revolution. Luther's ideas spread like wildfire. The invention of the printing press in the 15th century meant that his 95 Theses could be reproduced and distributed rapidly throughout Europe. What was once a local grievance became a continent-wide movement. Luther's ideas resonated with many, particularly with those who were disillusioned by the Church's corruption. The 95 Theses were just the beginning. Luther soon began writing more extensively, arguing that the Bible, and not the Church, was the ultimate authority on spiritual matters. Luther's challenge to the Pope and the Church's teachings became a hot topic. Some were drawn to his ideas, while others feared the consequences of rejecting the authority of the Church. What Luther had done was not just question the Church. It was a direct challenge to the very power structure that had governed Europe for centuries. The Catholic Church, understandably, did not take Luther's challenge lightly. In 1520, Pope Leo X issued a papal bull, Exsurge Domini, condemning Luther's writings as heretical. He gave Luther 60 days to recant or face excommunication. Rather than backing down, Luther publicly burned the papal bull, declaring his opposition to the Church's authority. This act of defiance sealed his break with Rome and marked the beginning of the Protestant Reformation. In 1521, Luther was summoned to the Diet of Worms, a formal assembly where he was asked to recant his beliefs. When Luther stood before the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V and church officials, he famously refused to deny his teachings, stating, "Here I stand, I can do no other." Luther's refusal to recant led to his excommunication and outlaw status. But he found refuge in Wartburg Castle, where he translated the Bible into German, making the scriptures accessible to ordinary people for the first time. His translation of the Bible into the vernacular empowered everyday people to engage with Scripture and interpret it for themselves, bypassing the Church's control. This was a radical shift in religious authority. Over time, Luther's ideas sparked a wave of Protestant reform movements across Europe. Reformers like John Calvin and Huldrych Zwingli began to develop their own branches of Protestantism, each emphasizing the importance of personal faith, Scripture, and rejecting the authority of the Pope. The Protestant Reformation didn't just change the religious landscape. It altered European society in profound ways. The divide between Catholics and Protestants would lead to decades of religious wars, like the 30 Years' War, which devastated much of Europe. The Reformation also led to the Catholic Counter-Reformation, where the Church sought to reform itself and combat the spread of Protestantism through efforts like the Council of Trent. Yet, despite these efforts, Protestantism continued to spread and flourish. Centuries later, the legacy of the Protestant Reformation is still felt. It laid the foundation for the modern concept of religious freedom and contributed to the rise of secularism, the spread of literacy, and the democratization of religious practice. Martin Luther's brave challenge to the Church was the catalyst for one of the most transformative events in history. His Reformation shattered the religious unity of Europe and set the stage for the rise of new religious denominations and ideas. The Protestant Reformation changed the course of Christianity and the course of history. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible stories from history.